You are rehearsing a future that doesn't exist and weakening your power in the present. Most people never notice this. They call it thinking, but it's not thinking. It's a slow surrender. You wake up with tension in your chest, not from reality, but from anticipation. You imagine conversations that haven't happened. You predict outcomes you can't control. You fight battles that don't exist. And by the time the day begins, you're already exhausted. That is the cost of worry. Not loud, not dramatic, but constant. A quiet leak of energy, draining your clarity, your confidence, your direction. The Stoics warned about this. They understood something most people ignore. You don't suffer from events. You suffer from your interpretation of them. Worry is not reality. It is imagination without discipline. If this shifted something in you, stay close. There's more ahead that will sharpen your mind. Subscribe if you're serious about change. Comment what's one thing you've been worrying about that you know you should act on instead. And the more you feed it, the more it controls you. Look at your life honestly. How many times has worry actually helped you? Not once. It didn't solve your problems. It didn't make you stronger. It didn't prepare you. It only made you hesitate, overthink, delay. Worry feels like action, but it produces nothing. And here's the uncomfortable truth. If you continue like this, you are training yourself to become weak. Not physically, mentally. You are building a habit of fear, a reflex that says, pause, doubt, wait. While others move forward, you stay stuck analyzing. Worry is addictive because it gives you the illusion of control. It tricks you into believing that if you think long enough, you'll avoid pain. But the opposite happens. You multiply pain. You feel it before it happens, during it, and after it's gone. 3 times the suffering for something that might never occur. A Stoic mind does something different. It separates what can be controlled from what cannot, and then it becomes ruthless. If it's outside control, it gets ignored, not emotionally, strategically, because attention is power, and wasting it is self-sabotage. Right now, you are giving your power away to opinions, to outcomes, to uncertainty. You are letting invisible possibilities dictate real emotions. That is not strength. That is surrender disguised as caution. Here's what changes everything. Next time worry appears, don't fight it. Observe it. Ask one question. Can I act on this right now? If the answer is yes, act immediately. If the answer is no, release it immediately. No middle ground. Because the longer you sit with worry, the stronger it becomes. It grows roots in your thinking. It shapes your behavior. It defines your identity. You don't notice it happening until one day you realize you've become passive, careful, hesitant, safe, and deeply dissatisfied. That's the real danger. Not failure, not rejection, not uncertainty, but becoming someone who avoids life instead of confronting it. Because worry doesn't protect your future. It steals your present. The Stoic approach is simple, but brutal. Face reality as it is, not as you fear it might be. Act where you can, accept where you cannot, and move forward without hesitation. You have more control than you think. Not over events, but over response. And that is enough, because your response determines your direction. Your focus determines your energy, and your discipline determines your outcome. Imagine a version of yourself that doesn't overthink. Not careless, not reckless, but clear, decisive, calm under pressure, unmoved by uncertainty. That version already exists, but it's buried under layers of hesitation. Every time you choose worry, you reinforce the wrong version of yourself. Every time you choose action, you rebuild the right one. This is not about motivation. It's about standards. You don't need more time to think. You need more courage to act. Because clarity doesn't come from overanalyzing. It comes from movement, from decisions, from experience. Start small. When your mind begins to spiral, interrupt it. Stand up, move, Do something physical. Break the pattern immediately, because thought loops need stillness to survive. And understand this: peace is not found by eliminating uncertainty. It is found by accepting it. The moment you stop needing guarantees, you become free. Most people will never reach this point. They will keep worrying, keep delaying, keep shrinking, and they will call it normal. But you see it now, and that changes everything. A life without constant worry feels different. Lighter, sharper, more intentional. You act faster, think clearer, sleep better. Not because life is easier, but because your mind is stronger. So the next time fear appears, don't negotiate with it. Don't analyze it. Don't entertain it. Face it. Act anyway. Because courage is not the absence of fear. It's movement despite it. You don't need to control everything. You just need to control yourself. And once you do that, worry loses its grip. And if you're still here, it means something in you is waking up. Not comfort, not motivation, awareness. And awareness is dangerous, because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. You start noticing how often your mind drifts, how quickly it assumes the worst, how easily it abandons control. You begin to realize this isn't occasional, it's constant, a background noise of doubt, playing on repeat, shaping decisions you don't even question. And that should disturb you, because it means your life isn't being directed by intention, but by reaction. You're not choosing your path, you're adjusting to fear, subtly, quietly, daily. And over time, that becomes your identity. Not someone who acts, but someone who hesitates. Not someone who decides, but someone who delays. And the longer that pattern continues, the harder it becomes to break. Because hesitation feels safe. It feels responsible. It feels intelligent. But it's none of those things. It's avoidance, refined into habit. And habits don't ask for permission. They run automatically. That's why you keep repeating the same cycles. You tell yourself, tomorrow I'll be different. But tomorrow comes, and the same thoughts return. The same doubts. The same resistance. And once again, you pause. That pause is where everything is lost. Not in failure, not in mistakes, but in hesitation. Because life doesn't wait for certainty. Opportunities don't wait for clarity. They move. And if you don't move with them, you get left behind. Not dramatically, not instantly, but gradually. Until one day, you look around and realize you've built a life based on what you avoided, instead of what you pursued. That's the quiet tragedy. Not losing, but never fully trying. And deep down, you already feel it. That tension, that frustration, that voice that says, you're capable of more. But capability means nothing without execution. And execution requires one thing most people lack: decisiveness, the ability to act before you feel ready, the ability to move without guarantees, the ability to step forward while your mind is still whispering doubt, because that whisper never disappears. It doesn't matter how strong you become, how experienced you are, how prepared you feel. That voice remains. The difference is, you stop listening to it. You hear it and move anyway. That is control. Not silence of fear, but dominance over it. And right now, you don't have that control. Not fully. Because if you did, you wouldn't be stuck in loops. You wouldn't replay scenarios. You wouldn't delay decisions. You would act immediately. And that's what separates those who grow from those who stay stuck. Speed of execution, not recklessness, not impulsiveness. Clarity followed by movement. While others are still thinking, you're already doing. While others are still doubting, you're already learning. And learning beats thinking every single time, because thinking keeps you in theory. Action puts you in reality. And reality corrects you faster than your mind ever will. That's why overthinkers stay trapped. They try to solve life without living it. They try to predict outcomes instead of experiencing them. And in doing so, they delay growth. Again, and again, and again, until delay becomes default, and default becomes identity. You don't want that identity, but you're building it every time you choose hesitation over action, every time you say later, every time you wait for clarity, every time you let fear decide for you. You are reinforcing it. Strength isn't built in comfort. It's built in friction. In moments where your mind says stop, and you continue. In moments where doubt appears, and you ignore it. In moments where fear rises, and you move anyway. That's where transformation happens. Not in perfect conditions, but in resistance. And if you avoid resistance, you avoid growth. Simple. That's why your life feels stuck. Not because you lack potential, but because you avoid discomfort. You choose mental safety over real progress. And mental safety is an illusion, because it feels calm in the moment, but creates regret over time. Real progress feels uncomfortable now, but creates confidence later. You can't have both. You either protect your feelings, or you build your future. And most people choose feelings. That's why most people stay average. Not because they're incapable, but because they're unwilling. Unwilling to face discomfort. Unwilling to act under pressure. Unwilling to move without certainty. But you're here, still listening, which means you're not most people. But that only matters if you act differently. Awareness without action is useless. Changes nothing. You can understand everything and still remain the same, because understanding doesn't create change. Execution does. So the real question is not, do you get it? The real question is, what are you going to do about it? Because after this ends, you'll have a choice. Return to your old patterns, or break them, and breaking them won't feel natural. It will feel forced, uncomfortable, because you're going against habit. But that's exactly what's required. You don't rise by doing what feels easy. You rise by doing what feels necessary, even when you don't feel ready, especially then, because readiness is a lie. No one is ever fully ready. They just decide and figure it out along the way. That's how progress works. Messy, uncertain, uncomfortable, but real. And reality is where power is built. Not in your thoughts, not in your plans, but in your actions. Repeated, consistent, intentional. That's how identity changes. Not through ideas, but through behavior. You become what you repeatedly do. So if you repeatedly hesitate, you become hesitant. If you repeatedly act, you become decisive. It's that simple and that brutal, because it means your current state is your responsibility, not your past, not your circumstances, your patterns. And patterns can be broken, but only with force, not motivation, not inspiration, discipline, the ability to act, regardless of how you feel. That's the standard. And it's higher than most people are willing to accept. But if you accept it, everything changes. Your mind becomes quieter. Your decisions become faster. Your confidence becomes real, not imagined, built through proof, through action, through repetition. And once you reach that point, worry loses its power completely, because you no longer rely on thinking to feel in control. You rely on action, and action removes uncertainty. Not completely, but enough. Enough to move forward. Enough to keep going. And that's all you need. Momentum. Because momentum solves what overthinking never will. It builds clarity. It builds confidence. It builds direction, step by step, without waiting, without hesitation. So now, this is where it becomes real. Not words, not ideas, reality. What are you going to do next? Not tomorrow, not later, now. One decision, one action, something you've been delaying, something you've been overthinking, something you know matters. Do it, immediately, no analysis, no hesitation. Just movement, because that single action breaks the pattern. And once the pattern is broken, everything starts to shift. Slowly, but permanently. That's how it begins. Not with a massive change, but with a decisive moment. And this is that moment. And now something shifts again, because the moment you think you understand this pattern is the exact moment it evolves into something harder to detect, something quieter, something more dangerous. Because worry doesn't always feel like fear. Sometimes it feels like logic. Sometimes it feels like preparation. Sometimes it feels like you're being careful, when in reality you're just delaying in a more sophisticated way. And that's where most people get trapped. Not in obvious weakness, but in disguised hesitation. You start telling yourself you're thinking things through. You convince yourself you need more time, more clarity, more certainty. But what you're really doing is buying comfort at the cost of progress. And comfort has a price. Not immediately, not loudly, but slowly in the background, where you don't notice it at first. You lose speed, you lose sharpness, you lose edge, and without realizing it, you begin to settle into a version of yourself that feels safe, but incomplete, that feeling you get sometimes, that quiet dissatisfaction, that lack of intensity, that sense that something is missing. That's not random. That's the cost of holding back. Because deep down, there's a part of you that knows you're not moving the way you should. It sees the hesitation, feels the delay. It recognizes the pattern, and it doesn't like it. But instead of confronting it, you distract yourself. You scroll, you watch, you consume. Not because you're interested, but because it keeps you from facing the truth. That you're avoiding something important, something necessary. And the longer you avoid it, the heavier it becomes. Not physically, but mentally. It sits in the back of your mind, creating pressure, creating tension, creating noise. And that noise follows you everywhere. Even when you try to relax, even when you try to focus, even when you try to sleep, it's there, waiting. Because avoidance doesn't remove problems, preserves them, keeps them alive, just beneath the surface, where they continue to grow. And eventually, they don't just stay in your mind. They start showing up in your behavior. You hesitate more. You doubt faster. You second-guess everything. Not because you lack ability, but because your mind has been trained to expect difficulty, to anticipate failure, to assume resistance. And when your mind expects resistance, it creates it. That's the loop. And most people never break it, because they never see it clearly enough. But you're starting to see it now. And that changes your position completely. Because once you see the mechanism, you have the ability to interrupt it. Not perfectly, not instantly, but intentionally. And intention is where control begins. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Because the moment you try to break this pattern, your mind will push back. Not aggressively, not obviously, but subtly. It will suggest delay. It will suggest waiting. It will suggest thinking a little longer. And it will sound reasonable. That's the trap. Because the more reasonable it sounds, the easier it is to follow. And the easier it is to follow, the longer you stay stuck. So the real challenge is not recognizing the pattern. It's acting against it. When it feels logical, that's where discipline becomes real. Not when things are clear, but when they are uncertain. Not when you feel strong, but when you feel resistance. That's the moment that defines everything. Because in that exact moment, you either reinforce the old version of yourself, or you create a new one. There is no neutral. There is no pause without consequence. Every second you hesitate, you are choosing something, even if it doesn't feel like it. And over time, those small choices build into something permanent. A mindset, personality, a life direction. That's why this matters more than you think. Because it's not about one decision. It's about the pattern behind every decision. And patterns are powerful. They remove the need to think. They automate behavior. They define outcomes. So if your pattern is hesitation, your outcome is stagnation. If your pattern is action, your outcome is growth. And growth is what you're really after. Not comfort, not safety, not ease, progress, movement, expansion. But progress requires something most people avoid: exposure. Exposure to uncertainty, exposure to failure, exposure to discomfort. Because without exposure, there is no adaptation. And without adaptation, there is no improvement. So every time you avoid action, you're not just staying the same, you're falling behind, quietly, gradually, but consistently. And consistency works both ways. Can build you, or it can weaken you. It depends entirely on what you repeat. And right now, you're repeating something, whether you realize it or not. So the question becomes, what exactly are you reinforcing? Is it hesitation? Or is it action? Is it doubt? Or is it movement? Is it fear? Or is it control? Because whatever it is growing right now, as you listen, as you think, as you decide what to do next. And here's where curiosity turns into something deeper. Because if you pay close attention, you'll notice that the urge to delay is strongest. Right before something important, right before growth, right before change, right before movement. That's not coincidence. That's resistance. And resistance always appears at the edge of progress. It's a signal, not a stop sign. But most people treat it like a warning. They feel it, and they step back. They interpret it as a reason to wait. But what if it's the opposite? What if that feeling is actually an indicator that you're exactly where you need to be, right at the boundary between who you are and who you could become? That tension, that discomfort, that hesitation, that's the line. And crossing that line is what changes everything. But crossing it requires a decision. Most people delay the decision to act without certainty. And that's where the difference is made. Not in knowledge, not in potential, not in intention, but in execution. Because execution cuts through doubt. It replaces imagination with reality, turns fear into feedback. And feedback is something your mind can work with, unlike imagined scenarios, which only create confusion. So the more you act, the less power worry has, not because it disappears, but because it becomes irrelevant. It no longer controls your behavior. It becomes background noise. And once it becomes background noise, it loses its influence. And once it loses influence, you regain control, not partially, but completely. But control is not given. It's taken, moment by moment, decision by decision, action by action. And the more you take it, the stronger it becomes, until eventually something changes, something subtle, but powerful. You stop waiting, you stop overthinking, you stop negotiating with fear, and you start moving, consistently, directly, without unnecessary delay. And that's when life begins to feel different, not easier, but clearer, because clarity doesn't come from thinking. It comes from doing, from engaging, from experiencing, from adjusting in real time. And once you experience that shift, it becomes addictive. Not the old addiction of worry, but a new one, the addiction to progress, to movement, to growth, to expansion. And that addiction builds momentum. And momentum changes everything. Because once you have momentum, you don't need motivation. You don't need inspiration. You just continue forward, again and again. And the longer you maintain that momentum, the harder it becomes to go back. Because going back means slowing down. It means hesitating again. It means returning to a state that no longer feels acceptable. And that's where identity locks in. Not through one decision, but through repeated action. Until acting becomes automatic. Until movement becomes default. Until hesitation feels unnatural. And at that point, you've become someone different. Not by accident, but by design. And that design started with something simple. A moment, a choice, a decision to act, when it would have been easier to wait. And that decision is still available to you, right now. Not later, not after thinking, but now. Because the longer you delay, the stronger the old pattern becomes. And the stronger the old pattern becomes, the harder it is to break. So if there's something in your mind right now, something you've been putting off, something you've been overthinking, something you've been avoiding, that's not random. That's the exact point of leverage, the exact place where change begins. And the only thing separating you from that change is action. Simple, immediate, uncomplicated action. No overthinking, no delay, no negotiation, just movement, because movement breaks the cycle. And once the cycle is broken, you're no longer stuck. You're in motion. And once you're in motion, everything else follows, naturally, relentlessly, forward. And now pay attention, because this is where most people lose the thread, not because it becomes complicated, but because it becomes uncomfortable in a different way. Not loud discomfort, quiet discomfort, the kind that makes you realize you are responsible for more than you've been acting like. Because once you understand that your mind is not attacking you but responding to how you trained it, the entire narrative changes. You are not dealing with random thoughts. You are dealing with conditioned responses, built slowly, reinforced daily, strengthened every time you chose hesitation over action. And that means something important. It means nothing inside you is fixed. Not fear, not confidence, not discipline. All of it is trained, which also means all of it can be retrained. But here's where the truth becomes sharper. Because retraining yourself is not a mental event. It is a behavioral war. You do not think your way out of this. You act your way out of it. And that is where almost everyone hesitates again. They try to understand before they move. They try to feel ready before they act. They try to eliminate doubt before taking a step. But doubt is not removed by thinking. Doubt is replaced by evidence. And evidence only comes after movement. This is where the Stoics positioned themselves differently. Not as people who eliminated fear, but as people who refused to negotiate with it. Marcus Aurelius did not wait for clarity before action. He moved through uncertainty with structure. Epictetus did not demand control over outcomes. He removed outcomes from emotional authority. Seneca did not avoid discomfort. He studied it until it lost its dominance. They were not immune to hesitation. They were disciplined against it. And that distinction is everything. Because discipline is not personality. It is response training under pressure. Now bring this back to you. Because right now there is still a part of you that wants certainty. A guarantee that the next step will work. A signal that says this is the correct path. But life does not provide that signal in advance. It only reveals correctness after commitment. And that delay between action and clarity is where most people break. They interpret uncertainty as danger, when in reality it is just untested ground. And untested ground is not a warning. It is an invitation. But the mind does something subtle here. It starts projecting consequences. It builds simulations of failure. It creates emotional experiences from events that have not happened. And your body reacts as if they are real. This is why worry feels physical. Because to your nervous system, imagined threat and real threat trigger similar responses. But there is a difference. Real threat demands reaction. Imagined threat demands awareness. And most people confuse the two. So they react internally to things that do not exist externally. That is where exhaustion begins. Not from effort, but from internal conflict with non-existent problems. Now slow this down and observe something deeper. Every time you overthink, you are rehearsing non-action. You are practicing delay. You are strengthening the identity of someone who pauses instead of moves. And repetition always wins. Not intensity, repetition. Which means the life you are experiencing now is not a result of one decision. It is a result of repeated patterns of response. And patterns are indifferent to intention. They only respond to repetition. So if you repeat hesitation, you become hesitation in motion. If you repeat action, you become action in motion. There is no philosophical escape from that. Only execution. Now here is where the real shift begins. Because once you see that your current mental state is not your identity but your conditioning, you stop personalizing it. You stop calling yourself anxious. You stop calling yourself overthinking. You stop attaching identity to temporary states. Instead, you see them as signals of training history, and anything that was trained can be untrained, but not through insight alone, through interruption. You interrupt the loop. You break the cycle at the exact moment it begins, not after it grows, not after it stabilizes, at the first appearance. That is why awareness without action is incomplete, because awareness shows you the pattern, but action rewrites it. And here is where discipline becomes very simple but not easy. When the thought appears, you do not debate it. You do not expand it. You do not build scenarios around it. You redirect behavior immediately, because behavior is the only layer that matters under repetition. This is where most people misunderstand Stoic control. They think it is emotional suppression. It is not. It is directional control of attention. You do not fight the mind. You refuse to follow it when it is unproductive. And that refusal is power. Now something more subtle happens over time. As you stop feeding worry, it does not disappear instantly. It loses authority. It becomes background noise instead of command. And that is the real transformation. Not silence of thought, but loss of influence. And once thoughts lose influence, you regain available energy. Energy that was previously consumed by simulation, by prediction, by mental rehearsal of outcomes that never arrive. And that reclaimed energy becomes clarity. Not conceptual clarity, operational clarity. You start acting faster. You stop needing emotional readiness. You stop waiting for confidence before movement, because confidence stops being a requirement. It becomes a byproduct. Now listen carefully to what this implies. It means your current limitations are not fixed walls. They are reinforced habits of attention. And attention can be redirected, but only if you interrupt it at the source, not after it escalates. At inception, that is where mastery exists, in early control, not late correction. And this is where everything becomes uncomfortable again. Because early control requires you to act before you feel ready. It requires you to move without emotional permission. It requires you to trust execution over sensation. And sensation will always resist this, because sensation prefers safety, even when safety produces stagnation. Now zoom out. Look at your life as a system instead of a moment. Every delay you allowed became training. Every hesitation became reinforcement. Every overthinking cycle became conditioning. And now that system runs automatically, without asking you. But systems can be overwritten, not erased, rewritten. And rewriting begins with contradiction. You act opposite to the pattern. Not once, repeatedly, until the system updates. That is how identity shifts occur. Not through motivation spikes, but through behavioral contradiction over time. And here is the uncomfortable truth most people avoid. You will not feel ready during this process. Readiness is not part of it. Readiness is the reward after consistency. So if you are waiting for readiness, you are waiting inside the same loop that created the problem. Stoic philosophy called this alignment with nature of action. Not resisting reality, not waiting for perfect conditions, but working within what is available now. Because now is the only environment where power exists. Everything else is projection. Now action builds reality, and reality replaces projection. And once reality becomes stronger than imagination, fear loses structure, because fear depends on unknown outcomes. But action turns unknown into known through experience. That is why avoidance strengthens fear, and action dissolves it. Not instantly, but irreversibly. Now you are approaching a point in this understanding where there is no new information, only application, which means everything from here is no longer philosophical. It is operational. You either reinforce the pattern again, or you interrupt it. An interruption will feel unnatural at first, because anything that breaks conditioning feels wrong initially, even if it is correct. That discomfort is not warning. It is recalibration, your system adjusting to a new operating mode. And most people quit during recalibration because they misinterpret discomfort as failure, when it is actually transition. So the question is no longer what you understand. The question is what you interrupt. Right now, not later, not after thinking, now. Because the longer you stay in awareness without interruption, the more you strengthen observation without change. And observation without change becomes passive awareness. And passive awareness becomes another form of delay. So the final layer is simple. Not easy. Simple. Act when hesitation appears. Move when analysis begins to loop. Interrupt before escalation. And repeat until silence replaces negotiation. Because at the end of this process, you do not become someone who never thinks. You become someone who does not obey every thought. And that distinction is control, not over the world, but over direction. And direction is everything, because direction determines identity, and identity determines outcome. And now the loop closes again, not into thought, but into action. And now it ends where it actually begins, not in understanding, not in agreement, but in silence right before action. Because every idea you've just heard only has one place to prove itself. Your next decision. Not tomorrow, not later today, right after this moment disappears. And here's what most people never realize. Nothing changes when you agree with truth. Everything changes when you obey it. Because awareness without movement is just noise in a different form. But awareness followed by action becomes identity. So now the question is simple. What version of you walks out of this moment? The one that understands, or the one that executes? Because both cannot survive the same life for long. One of them has to fade. And the strange part is, it is always the one you feed less. So if you felt something shift in you here, don't treat it like motivation. Treat it like direction. Something small, something immediate, something real. Do the thing you've been delaying. Say the thing you've been holding back. Start the thing you've been overthinking. Not because you feel ready, but because you finally see clearly. And clarity without action is just pressure waiting to build again. So break it now, before it rebuilds itself. And as you move forward from here, remember this. You don't need a different mind. You need a different response. And that response is always available. In the next moment, and the next, and the next, until it becomes who you are. If you made it this far, don't just leave this here. Subscribe quietly if you're serious about sharpening your mind. Because what comes next will go even deeper than this. And it will challenge the version of you that still hesitates. Like this video if it hit you in any way. Share it with someone who keeps overthinking their life instead of living it. And comment one thing you've been avoiding that you know you need to face. Not for me, but for yourself. And when you're done here, don't scroll away aimlessly. Watch the next video you see on your screen, because that next step might be exactly where your change continues.